information session is designed to give you some good insight as to our program associated with the American Rescue Plan Act grant funding that we're making available through this process. I want to just give you a brief overview of how we got here from Richland County's perspective. Richland County as an organization did receive an allotment of funds from the U.S. Treasury. That total allotment was about $80 million. And of that $80 million, when you look at the funding that was put back or provided for community-related efforts, that's certainly over 30% of the funding that the county received. Specific to that funding, the county, when we were going through that process, put out a survey to the community. And they said, community, tell us what do you think these funds should be expended on? Give us some feedback on things that you think are important for these funds to be used on. And that survey gave us some good feedback. Some of the things that you see listed in the breakdown of the categories that we'll talk about later are direct results of the feedback that we received from the community. Things like, how do we support unhoused individuals? How do we support individuals that are homeless? How do we support individuals that may be seniors who require some assistance in some form or fashion? How do we deal with things like food insecurity or youth and recreational services? These types of things all came from the survey that members of the community filled out and provided to Richland County. Richland County Council then came back and said, we want to now put these monies out to the community for those individual organizations, whether you may be a small business who was negatively impacted as a result of COVID-19, whether you were a nonprofit who were serving community citizens and you yourself experienced negative impacts, or the service that you need to provide for citizens who receive negative impacts due to COVID-19. So what you have here now is you have opportunities for Richland County nonprofit agencies, small businesses, and the like to further their services to the community utilizing these potential funding sources. And so what we're going to do this morning is try to help you understand how to complete the application process, what that looks like, and then how that's going to be reviewed, scored, and kept in compliance with U.S. Treasury guidelines. With that being said, I'm going to turn over the agenda to our Assistant County Administrator, Ms. Laurie Thomas, who works with our finance and budget operations here at Richland County. Laurie?
Thank you, Mr. Brown, and thank you everyone for being here. We have just been so overwhelmed by the number of responses and the number of people that have been here for the last two sessions, these are just the first of two sessions that we'll be having on this topic. And we really appreciate your time. We'll try to be respectful of it. A few housekeeping items, if you don't mind, that we learned last night. When you ask a question, if you can tell us who you are, that way if we're not able to fully address your question individually and you need some additional attention, we'll be able to reach back out to you so that we can get more specific with your questions. If you hear questions that are very similar to yours, if you might want to catch up with us at the end, last night we did run into a little bit of a shortfall on time. We've been really excited here in Richland County about this opportunity. It's not very often that you get, well, I can tell you I've been working for a really long time, and this is the first time I ever remember this kind of funding coming from the U.S. Treasury. It's not often that you get to work with the council and with the community to determine how these kinds of funds get allocated. So this has been a very exciting time. It's also been a very stressful time for some of our staff, and I want to give them a big kudos, specifically our Budget and Grants Department. I'd like to recognize them, if you don't mind now. Our Budget and Grants Director is Abhi Deshpande. Our budget manager is Denise Teasdale. Mattia Poe is our manager of grants. And Christian Stevens is our grant accountant. He's the gentleman over there helping to get everybody in at the last moment. So we want to thank those people for all the hard work that they've done to be able to get to this point for you to be able to apply for these funds. I also want to recognize today Sarah Harris, who is with us. She is with Grant Thornton. For those of you who have been following our process, you know that the county has chosen to have a third party to actually review all grants to ensure compliance with U.S. Treasury guidance. And they will also be scoring those grants so that council has the appropriate tools to be able to allocate funds appropriately for projects in the community. With that, I will turn this over to Abhi Deshpande, our budget director, and he's going to walk you through the categories of funding that are available.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abhi Deshpande. I'm the Director of Budget and Grants Management with Richland County. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of all the categories of these funds that are available. As Mr. Brown mentioned that when we received the ARPA funds, there was the community survey was conducted and got received feedback from all the different stakeholders in the community and how to spend this money. And based on that survey, the county council allotted some of the categories that these funds can be available for community-based projects or community-based or for community-based organizations. So there are total $16 million that will be distributed through these different categories. The first category is funding for small businesses. This is the only category that you don't require a 501c certificate. If you're a legal business entity in Richland County, you would be able to apply for this category of funds, and the total amount for that category is $1 million. Funding, the next category is funding for nonprofit, which is a $1 million. Now, rest of all the categories, that's where you need 501c certificate. So one thing I would like to definitely clarify here is, and just because we got so many different inquiries and the calls and emails about these all categories of funds, these are available only for the organizations, any kind of nonprofit organizations. So they are not available for individual citizens to apply, but individual citizens can seek these funds through these different organizations. So, so next category is funding for workforce training. For $1 million is for that particular category. Again, these organizations, if they are working in that area, like workforce training, or the next category is education assistance. So definitely any organizations that are working in that area, they will be able to seek that funding. The next category is education assistance, again, $1 million. Now, going forward, funding for home repair for seniors, $1 million. Again, this is one of the categories that we got several inquiries about, and from an individual citizen, okay, I'm such and such elderly person, and would I be able to seek this funding by myself? So that's, unfortunately, we do not have capabilities to receive their application on an individual basis. Again, going forward, the funding for addressing food insecurity, that's $2 million. Going forward, funding for broadband services and for in underserved areas, that's $2 million. Then funding for affordable housing, that's $4 million. Then funding for services for unhoused persons, that's $2 million. And funding for youth and recreational services, that's $1 million. At this point, if you have any questions, I can take up a few questions. If not, we can take the questions at the end of the, or go ahead. And are we giving them mic?
Yeah, if you do me a favor, if you would try to come over here if you have questions, so that way everyone can hear what the question is.
So mine is for nonprofits. Would that be only projects-based, or can those funds be used for operations and capacity building?
So if you're applying for nonprofit, all of this funding can be depend on the projects, and we won't be able to provide a guidance at this point. What are the allowable expenditures or not? Definitely, once if you're eligible in that category, then after our third-party evaluators, they will evaluate your application based on different projects, and then we'll be able to provide you that guidance after once that first phase of evaluation is done. So definitely, it's not a very clear-cut answer, but it really depends on the scope of the project and the kind of as well as the beneficiaries of that project that will be depend on. Yeah, and also another thing is like all organizations are eligible to apply for 3 categories of funding, which is like you may receive, you can apply for nonprofit, or you can, if you're working in affordable housing area, if you're working in education assistance, you can apply for those categories as well. So every organization can apply for up to 3 categories.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes. If our organization had discretionary grant funds from you last year, can we still apply for this, or does that kick us out because you have to wait 2 years?
No, you do not. So definitely you are definitely eligible to apply. Yes.
Hello. If we're applying for multiple categories, could we bundle the project, or would it need to be 3 distinct projects? For example, for nonprofits, for education assistance, and for youth and recreational services, there could be efficiencies if they were bundled, or would they need to be 3 distinct project applications?
Maybe we need to give you a little bit more individual guidance on that, but the rule of thumb is like if there are no duplication of services, that is the kind of basic rule that we'll look at it. But again, if the services are not overlapping against the from one project to another project, definitely that. Yeah, so if there are 3 individual projects, that would be easier.
Good morning. I'm from Big Red Barn Retreat. We are serving currently employed sheriffs and first responders. Do we comply with workforce training if they're already employed?
Yeah, so I think it's all, once you fill your application, if you can give us as much as information about the projects and Sarah Harris from our third-party evaluator from the Grant Thornton, she will talk a little bit more about how can you communicate your story and your project in the best possible way that for the evaluators to look at it. So again, means my general answer here is really depend on the project, and evaluators look at the holistically about your story. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Larimore. I'm with the Midlands Housing Trust Fund. For the affordable housing bucket, if you have projects to which the trust fund wishes to provide financing, and our loan terms provide for a 20-year restrictive covenant for affordability, does the maturity date for that loan have to be 20 years also?
Yeah, exactly. So again, I will kind of give you the previous answer that I gave it to the lady before you. Is really depend on the project, as well as another thing with the ARPA funds is you need to have the funds committed by December 2023 and being expensed by December 2024. So in that case, that's another rule that we'll be looking at. But again, I think your question requires a little bit more individual guidance on that particular issue.
Good morning. My name is Charlene Moultrie with C&M Financial Services, which is a small business. The fact that you said that funding is for small businesses, but the application seems to be more regarding nonprofit, does it have to have a special project for your business, or is the application being revised?
So for the small business, if you are a for-profit small business, there are some required documents that we'll be asking you to submit, and our budget manager, she will go through the required documents. But I think those are not definitely very project-specific requirements. I think one of the main requirement is if your business is negatively impacted by the COVID for last 2 years, and that is affecting your financial bottom line, that's the scope of for-profit category.
Good morning. My name is Charles Aiken, and I'm with Health Force LLC. We're a healthcare organization. My question is, once the grants have been decided, I see the date of December the 30th, 2022. So what's the process? So if we approved, or if you're approved for a grant, what's the next step?
So once the decision is made by December 30th, and then and so basically the grant the committee recommendations will be completed on December 13th actually. That's a tentative deadline. And then once the committee recommendation is finalized, then our budget and grants office, which is my folks and my team, will reach out to the organizations that were awarded the funds by the committee, and then we'll start the disbursement process, and there will be some paperwork involved, but budget and grants office will closely work with all organizations that will be awarded the funds.
Okay, my name is Doris Drake. I'm from Rebirth Enterprise Youth Development Program, and I have a problem understanding how do you decipher between a nonprofit and a service that you actually offer. For example, when we're providing a youth service and it is a nonprofit, how do you distinguish, or how do you break those two up? How do you go say I'm a nonprofit and as well as I provide my nonprofit provides a youth service? So you said we could apply for nonprofit as well as the youth services?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. So if you are a nonprofit who are working in the youth services area, so definitely you have two options that you can definitely apply in the nonprofit category, as well as you can apply in the youth services or recreational category as well. So as I said, like you have three options, and maybe you're working in the education assistance also. So maybe you will be eligible to apply in that category as well. So.
Even if I guess the answers or the application sort of resembles the same, if that makes any sense. So for example, if you're a nonprofit and you also work for youth services, if you apply for the nonprofit, your information is gonna look the same as your application for the youth services.
And that's possible, but as I said that Sarah Harris will mention a little bit more about that. As much as you can talk about your projects and communicate the best possible information that will help us to evaluate your project for the youth services. That's what we are asking. And Sarah is expert in that area, so she definitely will talk a little bit more about how can you communicate your story best possible way to us.
Hello, my name is Catherine Fleming Bruce. I have an LLC, Tinosa, and I'm looking at Part C, where it says expenditures will only be reimbursed. So is there, say somebody gets $15,000, is there a percentage that they will get up front, and then the rest of it, they have to spend their own money and be reimbursed, or some version of that?
So, yeah, means I think we addressed this question last night as well. But all the grants, they work on the reimbursable basis. So there will be some mechanism where you will get some upfront money, but as well, and then after the rest of the expenditures will be reimbursable. So there will be some kind of mechanism which we haven't we have not come up with yet, but or we definitely, I think, and we need to look at it, some of the Treasury guidance as well, but it could be around 25 to 75% expenditure, with 25% will be dispersed upfront, and then the 75% will be reimbursed after all the expenditures are submitted to us.
Good morning, Lenore Johnson with Benedict College. Has consideration been made for the category for grant amounts? Like, what's the minimum amount we can ask for, what's the maximum? And how many grants per category will be awarded?
So there are no minimum and maximum amounts set for each individual to receive. It's really depend on all the number of applications that we'll receive in that particular category, and the quality of the applications. So, and the need of the application. So there is so this will be very individualized decision based on each application by the evaluation committee. I think let me hand over to Denise Teasdale. She's our manager of budget, and she will talk about the Zoom grant application, where you can submit your applications, and talk about a little bit more of application questions and some documents. Thank you.
Everyone, with regard to the applications, if you could hold your questions until she walks through the application, I think it will be a little more self-explanatory, okay? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm sure I've talked to several of you concerning the Zoom grant application. I just want you all to know, at some point, if you're trying to apply and you go to Zoom grants, it may say that we're not accepting applications at this time. That's not true. It's just that the system is overloaded. So we ask that you come back, and it also tells you to go back and try at a later time. So sometimes early in the morning is good, sometimes late at night is really good, but we want you to know that applications are being submitted. It's just a lot of people are in the system at one time. So I am going to pull up the site and walk you through what you will see. And once you first log into the application, I told someone the other day, it's kind of like a FAFSA application. If you've ever applied for federal loans or a school loan or a grant, you want to have as much information in front of you. So right here at the top, it talks about all the things that are involved in the process. There are also some web links that talk about the census tract data, the council district data. All of that is something you may want to look at before you start your application. There's also a link to the Treasury, so you can see some of the list of the expenditures and what's expected of you before you start doing the applications. So it also tells you all recipients will be subject to reporting requirements. And I think a lot of people are asking, are we going to get the funds up front? How are we going to get paid back for our expenditures? And as Director Despande said, what will happen is you'll submit your first requisition. Your first requisition will allow you up to a certain amount to receive. Your next draw, in order to get that draw, you're going to have to submit some documentation to prove what you've spent the first check with. So it's not going to be, we're just going to hand you over the full amount. So say, for instance, and we'll do small numbers, if you're getting $100, and we give you $75 up front. In order for you to get the next draw, you're gonna have to show me $75 worth of receipts that you've already expended, even if it was from the past. That understood? All right, I think that makes it a little bit easier so you'll understand how the application process and as far as the funds are gonna be drawn down. So again, if you get an opportunity, check out the website of all these links before you start your application. That way you can have all your documentation in front of you once you start. So the first thing that you're going to see is going to ask you for your organization name, and it's just a summary of your organization. These are what you're going to get: your first name, last name, and if you're a small business or a nonprofit, all this is still going to look the same. So once you finish that summary, you're going to go to your application questions. And yes, all the questions are the same for small business and nonprofit. There's about 22 questions. And what you're going to do is, if you are a small business and some of these questions are not applicable for you, just put not applicable. Because once you try to submit your application and there's nothing there, you're going to have to go back and try to figure out why it will not allow you to submit your application. Because everything, all these questions, it's a required answer. So you want to make sure that you answer every question, even though it may not be applicable to you. Also, if there's a project, if you are a nonprofit or a small business, and you'll see that some of the things are required. So describe an issue or a need that your project will address. If you're a small business and you don't actually have a project, it's just that your business was affected, you need to give us information right there. But if you have a project and that project was affected, that's where you're going to put the information. So small business or nonprofit, you can still answer the questions. They may be catered to you a little bit differently, but at the end, the end results are going to be the same. So a lot of these, again, are specific. What will the funds be used for? That's a question for nonprofit or small business. So all of these are questions that can be answered, you know, whether you're a small business or a nonprofit. Also, there's a link in number 7, and it gives you the Treasury Guidelines, the final rule. I tell everybody, click on that, read that. Make sure you have an understanding of what the Treasurer Office is looking for. Also, if you can, go to the American Rescue Plan Grant website, so you'll know what you're really getting into. You'll know exactly what you're applying for. Because I think what is happening is a lot of people are saying, oh, there's funds available, but really don't know that there's a reporting mechanism that has to be in place. So it's not gonna be that Richland County is just gonna disseminate funds and walk away. It doesn't work like that. So there is a reporting mechanism in process that we have that you're going to have to report back on how you spent your funds. So it's not just, we just hand you a check and you go away. It doesn't work like that. We won't give it all to you at one time. So again, you have these questions. Describe in detail how your project is related to preventing or mitigating. And again, that's nonprofit or small business. If it's a small business and you were affected by COVID, that's where you're going to put your information about your business. Please describe the target population of your program. If you are a nonprofit and you're using one of the categories, you're going to break it down right there. But if you're a small business, you're going to describe the target population of your program. Even if it is your individual small business and say, you know, my small business was affected, the target population of the program it was my whole business. My staff was affected. I had to let people go. So you want to put everything in detail. The more, the better. So I'm not going to go through all of the questions, but again, the only reason I really wanted to touch bases on some of the questions because there was a question that it was catered toward nonprofits. And it is a lot of information for nonprofits because there is certain documentation that nonprofits have to have. But a lot of the documentations that nonprofits have to have, small businesses have to have. So that gears me over to the required documents. So I can show you just a little bit so you'll understand. So your required attachments, these are required attachments. And it may look as if, okay, this is all nonprofit. So we're asking you for a statement of financial position. That's your balance sheet, your revenue expenses. That's what we need to see. And we would love for it to be from year to date. Some of you all may have multiple ones. This is where you can download them. If I were you, I would download 19, 20, 21, and 22. That way, because if your business was affected, you can prove to me that this is what I was making in 2018, 2019 before COVID hit, and this is what it looked like in 20. Therefore, and now we're in 22 and it's getting better, but the years that you're trying to recuperate from are maybe 19 and 20. So that's a required document, a statement of activity, your income and your expense statement, that's small business or nonprofit, detailed project budget. We need a budget of how you're going to spend the funds. You want to make sure that you are capturing everything that you've expended and what you want to expend. Other documents regarding the project, if it's not a specific project and it's just your business, you want to upload your business information here. A IRS determining letter, if you are not a nonprofit and you don't have a 501, you should have a business license. This is where you can put your business license. Proof of current registration with the Secretary of State. You may not have that, but you can also provide your EIN number. There are things that you can put in these places. So what I will try to do is go in and edit these so it will look conducive to small businesses and nonprofits. So where it says the Secretary of State, I may put business license, business license if you are a small business. But these are documentations that are required. You gotta have proof of registration as a charity. You also have to have your W-9. So these are documents that if nothing is uploaded, you will not be able to submit your application. These are required documents that you have. Also, this is where you're going to put your budget. This is exactly what the applications look like. The application is going to look like when you go in and log in. You're going to see your summary first, and those are a couple of questions. All of your application questions, again, have to be completed. Something has to be in the square, even if it's not applicable. And then this is where you're going to put your budget. You want to be as detailed as possible. You're going to put your item description, your amount you're requesting, and how you're going to disseminate funds to the community for your project, or how you disseminated them in the past. So you have expense categories. If you need to add additional lines, I've added extra lines, so you can go in and you can add more information on your expense category. Also, tables. There are some that may want to include a table. However, they're not required. But if I were you, I would put something for FY20, FY21, and FY22. Your program services, things that you've had, funds that you've received in FY20, FY21, and FY22. Also, and this is where we're going to look at, is if you've already received funds from American Rescue Grant from the same project, and you may have received it from the city, and now you're saying, oh, I want to get some from Richland County. If we see that you've already received American Rescue Plan grant for affordable housing from the city, and now you're trying to get it from Richland County, that's a duplication of funds. We can't do that. So you want to make sure that you're not asking for the same thing from different counties or from the city. You want to make sure that everything is legit. So FY20, FY21, and FY22. And I believe that is it for me. Do you have any questions concerning the application? Yes, ma'am. I would suggest that you do both, your audited one and your year-to-date.
Okay, and then if you go to the tables tab, right there you were talking about if you received some funds from other places. Are you wanting, but that says expenses.
Well, yeah, your expense, because you've already expended the funds if you've already received them from somewhere else. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Her question was, if your business was not in existence in FY20, would she qualify for these funds? And I am going to leave that to.
This is in response to COVID. Let me frame it that way. So if your business was not in existence during COVID, you may have a difficult time saying that you were impacted by COVID. However, if your business is as a result of COVID and what you do, it responds to the mitigation and prevention of COVID, perhaps. So it will again be how you frame your project.
I had another question. Going back to when you said the duplication of funds. If you receive county funds of any sort, including discretionary funds, does that include?
No, no, that's something totally different.
Okay, just,
Mm-hmm.
just the
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Kimon Wright, North Minster Presbyterian Church. how does the funding, or is funding available for religious organizations that have been involved in some of the community work or some of the categories we see listed here? And would that also apply to staff as well?
That's a good question. Typically, most grants are not available to a church organization because it can't be a religious organization. I'll let Sarah clarify that more when she comes up, if she doesn't mind. You're certainly welcome to apply. I know many churches have foundations and things of that nature that actually do their work through. That's a little bit different.
Monica Lamb, Tri-City Visionaries. Are 501c4, the veteran organizations, are they eligible?
I believe so, but once we get Sarah up, she'll be able to go more in detail about that.
Okay, and just clarity, you may mention about reimbursable expenditures. Is that reimbursable expenditures for a project from 2019 to 2022, or is that from the time, what time period, I guess I'm asking?
Okay, to answer the question on timing of the expenditure, if it's in response to a small business, yes, you can look back to the time that COVID was most prevalent. However, if it is in response to a project, keep in mind that these funds did not exist until March of 2021. So no expenditures prior to that time would be eligible. Also, dependent on Treasury guidance and the project that you're looking for, funding may not be retroactive in some cases. So it's going to be really important to read those guidelines.
Hi, I'm Sarah Sally with Richland Library. I wanted to get clarification on if you've received ARPA funds before. Can we not, so we have. So could we not receive ARPA funds again to expand service? It wouldn't go to the same individual. We want to help more individuals.
That's a bit of a dichotomy, if you don't mind, and it's very specific to organizations. With regards to expansion of service, it would have to be, you're going to have to put it on a project basis as to what you would do. Again, qualifications for those services are going to be based on a competitive basis, okay?
Up there.
I'm short here, so. If you can just come over here, that would be great. She's already here, but let her go first.
Again, Monica Lamb, Tri-City Visionaries. Do you have to have employees? I'm not sure if y'all answered that yet.
I'm going to resort back to Sarah. Sarah's going to be able to break it down. I think it's also going to have to do a lot with your project. If you have a project and no employees, how are you going to execute the project? So it kind of depends on what the project is and how you're going to disseminate your funds.
Hi, Lakeisha Bowman, Benefits Data Trust. So we're a national nonprofit that serves South Carolina as well, and we've received ARPA funding in different capacities, but not in South Carolina. So as an organization, can we still apply, if that makes sense?
When you say your organization all over South Carolina?
No, we're national, so
You're
we're
national.
in several states.
So,
but we serve South Carolina as well.
I'm going to leave that one up to Sarah.
So well, I can say this. Funds issued in Richland County have to serve Richland County. That is the county's wish, okay? You would have to show how you're going to divide that out, and you would also have to show that none of the funds that you've received previously have come into the county.
And also, I think even though like if you're national, still you have to be registered in South Carolina as well. So that, you know, Sarah may clarify that, but I think if you're registered in South Carolina, and as Ms. Laurie mentioned about if your funds are getting expensed in the Richland County, for the Richland County, that's possible scenario.
Hey, how y'all doing? My name's Nathaniel Dent. I'm the owner of Art Club. I have a small business. I've been in business for like 8 years. I've did many collaborations with nonprofit. I just now founded my nonprofit within the last like year to start my own. Will I still be able to qualify for the nonprofit, or I just do small business and youth?
You can apply as a nonprofit. You can apply as a small business. There are going to be two different applications, two different scenarios, and it will be based upon the qualifications of those applications.
So I guess my question is there a year? I mean, is there a time based like your nonprofit has to be issued within this time?
There is a question about the history of your nonprofit. There is no distinction, though. Again, it's all project-driven.
I'm going to bring Sarah up because I think a lot of the questions that I'm getting have nothing to do with the application. And I keep saying we're going to talk with Sarah. And again, she's with Grant Thornton. So let me pull up your rubrics for you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Well, I am very excited about this process. So I'll give you a little history about myself because I want you to be comfortable, okay? I live in this community. I was a public servant for over 15 years. I have served in social work. I have served in education and also with the military. So I have strong roots here in this community. This is the first time that this community has really received funds of this magnitude. It's an extraordinary time. So we have a lot of technical questions. I'm taking notes of that. I'll bring that back to my colleagues, and we will provide some answers afterwards that are really going to flow into a lot of the areas that you have questions about. But for now, what I will answer is our application process that was explained has a lot, and it ties into this particular rubric for evaluation. Now, financial management processes are incredibly important. So what you want to do is make sure that what you're describing is actually, I spent this much money because I was impacted by COVID-19. This did not go into my original operational expense. So I was out of pocket, essentially. So you want to think of it as a cause and effect. So what we're really doing here in the first area of project summary, where we score you at 30 points, we want you to tell us your specific story. This particular funding has a lot of diverse needs. We're seeing a lot of different emerging trends that we have really not seen before. Can you ask if anybody needs a rubric? Oh, does anyone have a rubric or need a rubric to look at? Okay, so to answer one of the questions that came up earlier, 501C or 501-4 or 504. Okay, so you can apply under those because they're both in the nonprofit category. Just specify if you don't see a drop-down menu within Zoom grants, it may not be in there. Just pick 501 or 501C, and then you'll illustrate in your narrative the specific details of it. So just let us know. What you'll have to do is just navigate with this particular repository and this program. Zoom Grant sometimes is not so intuitive, so just work with us and bear with us through the process. But for the purpose of this, I'll go over this first area, project summary. This is really important because Richland County has done an excellent job framing this rubric specifically to get funds infused into this particular community. So let's look at the first one. So we'll see things like 2 CFR 200 Part F. These are all auditing principles. So as you start going through and building your narrative, make it financially focused, okay? But also share your story with us about how this cause and effect impacted you specifically for COVID-19. Okay, so that's a really big one. So I'm just going to read one of these. Summary clearly addresses grants administration process for identifying and examining how community-based needs are met. This is your story, okay? Tell us as you go through that application, use this rubric, go into your application, and you can build your framework based off of this information. So we're going to scroll down here over to your project impact. So again, cause and effect ties into a lot of this. I have seen some very diverse situations come about. I've personally been impacted by COVID-19. We've had family members that passed away, and there were expenses that we were not expecting along that way. If you are a small business, I worked with City of Casey for quite some time. I was there when the pandemic hit. We had so many small businesses that were drowning. What you want to do is tell us, COVID-19 caused these issues for my business. I may have had to let people go. I may have had to reduce payment. I may have actually lost my business. Illustrate that information in the project impact. So you're bringing your idea of your solution to this project impact for COVID-19. So if the federal government were to award you, you would use this funding responsibly by managing it. You may have different process owners, which means that you have people that can handle your accounting functions. If you are, let's say you have an idea that you really want to pilot a project, ARPA funding is also supporting those areas as well. So if it's your dream to start something because it was born from a COVID-19 impact, that is also a consideration area of ARPA funding. So it is very broad, it is very wide, and everyone's story is uniquely different. So that is what you're going to illustrate as you go through that application. Infuse as much detail as you can. Provide all your financial banking statements, anything that looks like a way that you can substantiate a loss or a future gain, okay? And when I say by future gain is because I'm going to be providing this service to the community, this is the project impact. We'll have a 30% increase in community awareness or impact levels. So those are very important things to incorporate into that project impact area. So I'm going to scroll down here to our organizational background. Again, all of this framework is built around your particular program. So express to us the need, express to us how that relates to the funding that you are requesting. And then our evaluators, we actually have quite a bit of people on the federal side with Grant Thornton that are experts in evaluating these applications to ensure that the federal alignment with U.S. Department Standard Treasury is also aligned with the project success. So as much detail as you can insert into these applications to state your case, the better our evaluators will be able to go through the process expeditiously. So I'll move down here to budget. Now, budget is 30 points as well. This is a really large area. We want to know that you have some capabilities to manage your financial processes. Financial funding is very tricky with the federal government. I've seen a lot of different things happen over the years where either monies could be misspent or sometimes people may not know the standard to which they have to spend money. So they may spend something and it's just not a qualifying item that they can be reimbursed for. So that's why it's really important, like Ms. Denise said, go in there and read those U.S. Treasury Guidelines. I know that nobody wants to do that. That's not fun. I don't even enjoy doing that. There are a lot of different considerations that are being made at the ARPA level. So I don't want to tell anyone not to go in there, not to apply. I want everyone to go in there. I want everyone to apply. You just need to state your case and make sure that there's a relation. COVID-19 caused this, and this is my solution to fix it. So that is this rubric in a nutshell. But once we start going through this process, I'm going to provide some more technical assistance, and I'm also going to give you my telephone number. So as you go through, we may have some complex cases where people want to apply for different grants. If you believe that you can summarize your project grant in one area and specifically outline your budget, that's great. But if you feel that as you go through that application process and you say, you know what, I think I might actually need to fill out another application in another funding pool because this is more suitable to what our program needs are, then do that as well. So obviously, if you're a nonprofit, you have 3 areas that you can apply up to. You know, if you are a business, you have just the one category. But make sure you're very specific about everything. Incorporate as much detail as possible, and that is what's going to help drive this home. So I'm excited to be part of this process with you. And we have a question over here. Yes, sir?
Yes, related to your last point, if we're a nonprofit eligible for 3 areas, and our project idea could plausibly sit in any one of those 3 areas, would you advise us to just pick one and run with it, or apply in all 3 and give a caveat, we will only accept funding from one category, but leave it to the reviewers to determine which funding pool to fund from should we win?
Right, so this is a complicated decision. It's very subjective to your organization. I think that as you go through the application, take a look at that rubric, match those areas up as much as you can when you're explaining things. And you will find as you go through that application process that sometimes it is more comprehensive to build one grant than it is to parse it out between three. But obviously, if you have a higher probability of three, then that could also indicate that we'll evaluate all of those applications, whether or not you parse it down to one or three, but it's subjective to your organization and your needs. So I can't be, specific about that, and I apologize for that. But ARPA funding is very diverse. So we're seeing a wide range of needs being met. So it's subjective.
One follow-up question.
Okay.
Simpler. I see 2 CFR 200, which I'm very familiar with.
Okay.
Just to be clear, this is going to follow federal budget guidelines and not state of South Carolina.
Correct. So this is a really good conversation to have. So federal guidelines are what we're following here. So in your organization, you may be, as an example, when I worked at City of Casey, we followed municipal guidelines. We had our own financial policy. We had our own area that we followed. Now, we did follow in tow with state Treasury guidelines as well. Federal funding is very uniquely different. Okay, it's different in nature, and so it's one of the most stringent guidelines. So that is the adherence that we're following. So when you see 2 CFR 200, if you've never seen that before, never heard of that before, that is specifically related to what you'll hear as a single audit. Those single audits, that is incredibly important for the federal government. They review everything, which is why it's very important. If you were impacted by COVID-19, I can't stress this enough, you have to show evidence that you were negatively impacted through financial statements. You have to have something hard. And that's usually what the federal government is looking for, hard numbers, hard data. Now, this may not apply to businesses that are coming here for the first time and are applying for grant funding because they want to pilot an initiative. So I'm going to give you a very specific example. When I was with another organization working in education, we had a group that was piloting an innovative tech feature. They would trailer buses out with computers for computer labs to rural areas. They actually did not know if they even qualified for the grant, but we had a teacher at the district level who was working with that, or an administrator, and he was able to partner with that group. What we saw from that was traditionally, the federal government does not actually fund programs like that. But because the unique nature and his explanations, he was able to back that up with a lot of statistics, a lot of information that was very specific to how he was going to have a positive project impact. So those are kind of the things that we're looking for. The federal government looks for things of that nature. And so it's a lot. It's overwhelming. So the first step is getting into the application, filling it out, and inside that repository, you may feel overwhelmed, like you've got to have a ton of information. This is just the nature of how grant applications work. So you can save your information, you can save your work, go back into it, retouch it, readdress it. You have until the end of the month to get all of that in. So very important, make sure that you substantiate all of your financial documentation. Even if you don't have a budget, and I'm speaking more for the small businesses, and you're piloting a new idea or a new program, be very specific about maybe former operational expenses you had or experience that your accounting people in your organization have that can manage the funds. Do you have the adequate staff levels? Do you have people that are accountants in your organization that can handle that? Do you have a separation of duties? So be clear about that. If you take a look at that rubric, that's really going to be your guide to break down how you narrate your story to us. So any other questions? Could I ask you to come over this way so we can get you on mic? Or actually, if you just say your question, I'll be happy to repeat it for you.
I was wondering, since we're like a startup business, what would we put as far as like for the documents for the budget and stuff? If we wouldn't really have any.
So the question is related to what documentation they could give for a startup business, Sarah? Okay, that's a good question. So for startup businesses, you probably have an idea of how much funds that you're wanting to request, right? Start with that. Break it down for us. Say 10% of this is going to be for personnel or administration costs. 30% is going to be for this amount. Ideally, Then go back into your narrative and Zoom grants and explain that financial breakdown to us and include, we are a startup business. This is a unique program. What you're doing is you're basically stating your case. You're saying, look, this is something that was born from COVID-19, and I really think this will have a positive impact on this community. And I'll use these funds to execute these solutions for these complex problems. So that's what we're looking for. So you don't necessarily have to have a strong budget. Now, of course, we don't want you to write a grant that exceeds that amount. So be fair and reasonable to when you're incorporating that budget in, but tell us your plan. I think that's the most important thing is you're telling your story, your unique story, and you're also giving us your financial plan on how you'll manage those funds appropriately.
So I did notice a lot of language in RFP or in the application that talks about underserved communities. But then I look at the application and the requirements. And so I'm wondering, has the committee thought about augmenting the processes or having the scoring so that organizations who are not this resourced have some sort of like accessibility? Because otherwise what's going to happen is like these funds are not going to be diverted to organizations that are grassroots, and they're not going to be eligible for organizations who don't have like grant departments, right? Because I've written grants for grassroots and I write them all the way up for national services, right? I'm writing one right now with the County of LA, right? So what I'm saying is, if you're talking about you want these grants to serve underserved communities, I don't hear anything about the processes being more accessible, and that's what I wanted to ask about.
Okay, that's a good question. So I will say this rubric was designed with that in mind. Obviously, with the application process, it is very difficult to put all of that information in there. So the rubric stands as a supplement as well to address that complex nature. So we are looking for a wide range of different diverse stories. This is what this grant is about, okay? Everyone is going to be evaluated on an equal basis because it is a competitive grant. So we have federal reviewers that are going to be looking at that process. So while it may not specifically state that information inside of the questions in the application, the onus is with you to go into that application, to develop that story, and to tell us how you are serving a certain population. Now, you may not be serving an underserved or marginalized community here. So those are, our small businesses. They may not be able to really state that they are serving those particular communities. What you're doing is you are giving us a sampling of the communities that you do serve, and you're explaining those processes and how we go through that. So we will take into consideration all levels of the applications, from whether you are a small business owner to you are a nonprofit at a grassroots level. This rubric was actually designed through a social work framework, okay, to integrate some very inclusive metrics into this process, because obviously grant applications can only ask a very limited amount. So the rubric is really designed to look at community impact. But obviously, it could also be economic impact. If your business has a positive impact on the economy, then that's something that ARPA funding is looking at as well. The concentration in grant language is generally with underserved communities, and I get that because I've worked as a social worker in the field. So those are things that we're looking at from a very comprehensive level. We have team experts that review it from the business side. We have team experts that review it from the grant side, grassroots level, and nonprofit level as well.
Monica Lamb again from Tri-City Visionaries. I totally agree with her point, because our organization, we do housing repairs. And when I made mention earlier about not having employees, it's because we generally take majority of our grant funds to pay contractors to support. So we are doing housing repairs for most of our seniors. And those seniors in the rural areas, Gaston, Eastover, Hopkins area, they require, because their homes were built, they're ineligible for housing trust because it's built before 1968. And then they're ineligible for USDA 504 application because maybe it's a unincorporated poverty-stricken area, so they don't have the credit scores, right, to get the help. So we expend most of the fund in contracts to help repair the homes. So I guess my question is it frowned upon? So I'll write the grant to meet the requirement and put in employees and then open up the accounting systems and that kind of thing. But I guess my question is it frowned upon if they see, okay, you went from contractors to employees to help land the grant? Because we don't necessarily have to use employees, because we would rather spend the money on the seniors, because their projects since 2015 and the flood and that water, it shifted home foundations, so you can't do the roof if you can't do the foundation.
Right.
So their projects are like extreme. So we would rather do contracts. So if it's frowned upon, then I guess we have to approach it from a pilot perspective in order to try to meet the requirements.
And I want to be very clear about this. It's not frowned upon. Everything that you just explained to me is what you'll narrate in your application. So while the questions may not be specific to that particular area, infuse it into the application. Our reviewers are highly skilled at the federal level. They have worked with federal policy for a very long time. Many of them are also attorneys as well, and accountants and auditors. So they know what the federal government is really looking for in terms of compliance and risk. So what you'll do is incorporate all that information into the application. So as the reviewer goes through there, they say, okay, well, they don't have an actual accounting department, but can they manage these funds appropriately? So I think that's probably the precedence that I need to set with this is you want to demonstrate that you can manage the funds appropriately, even if you may not have a fully developed accounting department. It is always good to have a fully developed accounting department, but in your efforts and a lot of other people's efforts here with grassroots organizations, we are going to review those as well. So incorporate that into the narrative, and we will go through that with a fine comb.
How are you? What quality assurance documents will be needed when we have to report?
Okay, so a lot of reporting is going to be essentially what you've put into your application. So we're going to be looking at a lot of different things. I'll give you an example as we start closing out grants and we have to reach back out to subrecipients to make sure that they are in compliance. We're going to ask for bank statements. We're going to ask for audit information. We're going to ask for receipts. We're also going to look for proof of payment, that money was actually spent and it left your particular account for your organization. So those are areas that we're going to look at financially in a closeout review. Those are traditional to all grant processes. So what you want to do to make sure that you're really solidifying and substantiating your work is make sure that if you had receipts from 2022 where COVID-19 directly impacted your business, scan copies of those receipts. Make sure you have all of that. Also pair that up with a proof of payment. That's really with any financial process. That's what we're going to be looking for as we go through closeout processes. Obviously, this grant has to be expended very quickly. So if you are awarded, those are the type of documents that we're going to be looking for. There are also going to be some reporting mechanisms. Quarterly, you will have quarterly reports that you have to turn into us. And that's reporting to us on validating your request, your activities that you've stated in your grant application. And we'll go through all of those processes through those quarterly evaluations. So quarterly evaluations all the way up to the award stage and the post-award stage of closeout, we're going to be monitoring all of those areas. So very important, save everything. If you spent any money on anything that's COVID-related, make sure you pull that up. Start looking for your proof of payment for those as well. That's important if you are writing a grant to substantiate those losses. Yes, ma'am.
So do you suggest that we open up a separate bank account for those funds?
You know, I would not suggest any of that. That's really subjective to your organization to do that. If you feel that that is a better way to aggregate your funding, then that would be permissible, but that's not something I can advise you on. It's very subjective. I will say, in municipal government, there is a separation of accounts. There are specific codes that go onto an account, and that account is specific to grant funding only. No one can go in there and dip into it except for allowable key process owners. So that's really important. So it's really just a decision at your organization level you'll have to make. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good
I'm
morning.
Jackie Hill from Nest Stream Hot Dogs, and I've never received any type of grant or income from anything. Everything's been out of pocket, and I started it in the midst of COVID, and I'm like at the flea market. I'm a hot dog vendor. So you're saying the trail, like I pay taxes, I have bank account, I file taxes, all of that. Would somebody like myself qualify? Like I have a hot dog cart and now I have a trailer and I'm looking to expand my trailer to expand my business, and it's all been at my own expense. So my question to you is, does someone like myself or business like mine qualify for this type of grant?
Yes, you can certainly apply for the grant. What I will say that's very important for you to narrate within your application is to express how your business has been impacted by COVID-19. Again, really remember, COVID-19 is the reason why these funds are being pushed into the community. It's all about COVID-19. If your business suffered, if it had a hardship during 1 year that you opened, and you believe it's from COVID-19, express that to us in your application. Be very specific. If you can state 4 months, I'll give an example. During FY22, I made, $10, but FY21, I only made $5. Be very specific with how that affected you, okay? So I know that's a very basic level explanation, but you want to be as detailed as possible. So yes, everyone is encouraged to apply for these funds. Again, the only disqualifier right now at this point with ARPA funding is if you are an individual citizen trying to apply for these funds.
Sarah, I think some of us are still waiting for your phone number.
Oh, yes. Okay, my telephone number is 803-231-3093. So again, I'm Sarah Harris. The number is 803-231-3093. Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to give out my email just yet, but please give me a call, and I assure you, we have a complex team that is going to be helping assist with this grants administration process, and so we will get through this. So just keep calling me until you reach me, and we will walk you through the whole process, okay? Yes, apply for it and be very descriptive. I think that in those cases you have to be even more descriptive, because if you are piloting a program, it's not been done before. We are looking with the ARPA fund for innovation, okay? Innovation is very important, inclusivity and innovation. So if the program can spark that design and you have a strong, robust framework that you can build out, our evaluators will take a good look at that. Okay. You sure? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure how to answer this. Thank you. I am part of a nonprofit who's looking at building an innovative community outreach in partnership with churches. So because it's an equal partnership, my question is, do we apply as the church? Do we apply as the community organization, or both?
This is a complex question because ARPA guidelines are not as clear about this area. What I would recommend is that we know that federal funding traditionally does not support church organizations. Typically, what they are looking for is nonprofit organizations that are affiliated with churches. So I'll leave it at that because it is very subjective to your organization. Now, if you are operating as a business, then of course you would qualify under the one area per this grant, but that would be under a business. So you stated you were a nonprofit or a business? Okay. You would have to apply as a nonprofit, But if you're partnering with other organizations, you really have to be very clear about that in your application. That's where it can become very tricky. The other organizations, are they nonprofit? Do they have nonprofit sectors within those churches? A lot of churches have a nonprofit foundation. They don't. So you would be executing that on behalf of those organizations. Okay. I would encourage you to apply as the nonprofit, just as is. But just keep in mind as they evaluate that, if they see that partnership linked up between churches as well, that can become very difficult with federal standards. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, everyone, if you don't mind, after this, to be respectful of everyone else's time now, we're going to sort of wrap this up, okay?
I'm with Love Never Fails, and we are a nonprofit organization that is in Richland County, but we help children in other counties, but most of the money is fed back into Richland County. Would we qualify?
You can, but I'll be very specific about this. If you apply for a Richland County ARPA fund grant, all of that funding must be spent directly here in Richland County. You'll have to validate that through your financial reporting. So that's going to be very important. I think that when you look at larger organization nonprofits that are at the national level, they also have nonprofit chapters that work through at the local level. So you still qualify to apply. You just need to make sure that you're very clear that all of those funds and your narrative explains will only be spent here in Richland County as they are Richland County funds. Okay?
We have one question. Actually, I know one there and one there that have been lingering, so if
Okay.
we could go ahead, we'll get.
Would you, grants being rejected for amounts requested, would you send back adjusted amount? Say we apply for a grant for $100,000 and you don't have that funding, would you reject it because it's $100,000? Or would you send back a adjusted budget, say, we won't give you 100, but we'll give you 70?
That's a good question. So this gentleman just asked, if you apply for a grant for $100,000, and will the application just be rejected if we have a lower threshold? So no, it's not going to be rejected for that reason. We will reach out to you individually. Technically, what we will do through this process is reach out to individual process owners for these grants and let you know if we could only support a certain amount. And from that point, you could either decide if that was the right opportunity for you or not. Sometimes I've gone through the grant process and, I applied for a grant and they said, we can only support this much, but I really needed another amount to help support the features of the grant. So, but no, we won't reject it just because it doesn't meet that particular threshold. Obviously, we don't know what that threshold is because the federal government hasn't been entirely clear about that process yet. So I would say reach for the stars, but be fair and reasonable about it, okay?
And ma'am.
You wanted to ask your question? Yeah, I was gonna ask it, but I'll go ahead. Just kind of switching
Yes, ma'am.
to the small business. I think I heard you say, if there's a project that is, a small business would like to propose, but have to show that the money is going out. So scenario, a fine arts center, students have been impacted and want to be able to provide scholarships to be a part of that fine arts center. To me, the funds would probably stay in-house because they're paying themselves for the child to attend. Will that count with that?
I'll say that's a tricky area as well. Usually direct assistance funds do not go to categories like that with the federal government. They are really leery of doing anything like that. What you would need to really focus on is if you have your small business and you had direct operational impacts. So as an example, you didn't have children that could attend because their parents were hard up for cash and they just didn't have the capability to continue with that educational program. And so you could speak about that. I will say and I'm sorry I can't give you more specific answers. ARPA funding is very confusing and it's very wide right now with what they're looking at. But something like that traditionally I've seen has not had a lot of success in the future just because there's a liability factor with doing that. Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right, well, thank you so much.
just gonna go ahead and close out. Thank you all for your attendance. You have the information there in your, hopefully in your hands. If not, there's some information left. If you have a question, please reach out. Look at the guidance from the website. Click on those links. Make sure you become acclimated with the term subrecipient, because that will really speak to you on the level of responsibility that you're going to have if you are awarded these funds, because these are federal guidelines that we're following, and we all be responsible for how we handle and deal with that, including the reporting and compliance portion. So hopefully this has been helpful for you all. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. You have a good day.